everyone. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Been All Around This World, a podcast brought to you by the Association for Cultural Equity. I'm your host, Nathan Salzberg, curator of the Association for Cultural Equity's Lomax archive. In this podcast, we devote ourselves to the 7-decade recording career of folklorist and documentarian Lomax. And in this, our second season, we're commemorating the 60th anniversary of Lomax and Shirley Collins' so-called Southern Journey field recording trip, undertaken over 2.5 months in the fall of 1959, with each of our episodes devoted to a particular region, community, or tradition that the pair encountered. This time around, we'll focus on the Sacred Harp, its music, and its singers. The songbook called The Sacred Harp, originally published in 1844, has become synonymous with a 4-part polyphonic singing tradition, long restricted to the American South, but that, against nearly all odds, has been experiencing a recent renaissance. And this not just in America, but all over the world, from Ireland to Poland to Japan. Alan Lomax was fascinated and challenged by Sacred Harp singing. He loved the music, believed deeply in its democratic essence, and tried 3 times over 40 years and various recording technologies to adequately capture its indelible magic. Before we get into Lomax's connection to Sacred Harp, here are a few words of background for any listeners unfamiliar with this unique music. The Sacred Harp itself was just one of dozens of so-called fa sol la hymnals that appeared in the early to mid-1800s, in its case compiled by Benjamin Franklin White in 1844. These songbooks were put together, published, and peddled largely by itinerant singing school instructors who used 4 different shapes to identify the notes, fa, sol, la, and mi, in marked contrast to the 7-note solfege system, do, re, mi, etc., that most of us were taught as youngsters, in keeping with more Europeanized ideas of musical education. The 4-note fa sol la method dates back to Elizabethan times, and it held sway in New England till around the 18-teens and 20s, when it began to be pushed out by the, quote, better music modernizers who set up choirs and organs in church, literally removing the music from the hands of congregations. The rougher and more democratic shape note approach to group singing was thus disseminated south and west, until it became entirely the provenance of Southerners, their singing associations, unions, and conventions, which met with varying frequency all across the South to sing from their preferred shape note songsters. Parenthetically, by the middle of the century, a 7-note movement also gathered steam among Southern modernizers, although the Sacred Harpers held out. 4 parts comprise of Sacred Harp singing: treble, alto, tenor, and bass, with each part arranged around what's called the hollow square, in which the leader of each song stands and beats the tempo with his or her hand for the singers to keep time. Standing in that hollow square and receiving the full spectrum barrage of sound from those 4 parts is an experience unlike any other. Over time, the Sacred Harpers became the predominant shape note singing community in the American South, with its book revised 4 times between 1869 and 1991 by the Sacred Harp Publishing Company and its dynasty of North Georgia and Alabama singers, composers, and instructors. A 5th revision is currently underway. And by an interesting evolutionary dynamic and a testament to the endurance of its practitioners, the phrase Sacred Harp has become a byword for the entire Southern shape note singing tradition, past and present, 4-note and 7-note alike. We'll start the program with one of the early commercial recordings of Sacred Harp singing. J.T. Allison's group from Moody, Alabama, were the most prolific Sacred Harp ensemble to make records in the 1920s. They cut 30 sides on a single day in 1928. 28 of these were issued. Most of their recordings featured, some might say were compromised by, piano or organ accompaniment, which would never be heard at a Sacred Harp singing. The phrase Sacred Harp, after all, refers to the unaccompanied voice and the breath of the lungs. This track, however, is an extraordinary a cappella performance, Weeping Pilgrim, page 417 in the Sacred Harp, the music of which was composed by J.P. Reese in 1859. You're listening to Been All Around This World.
song was a lot for the soul, for the soul and soul. So long, so long, so long, so long. Was a lot for the soul and soul. You may tell them, Father, when you see them, I'm a poor mourning pilgrim, unbound for Canaan's land. You may tell them, Mother, when you see them, I'm a poor mourning pilgrim, unbound for Canaan's land. I weep, and I mourn, and I move slowly on. I'm a poor mourning pilgrim, I'm bound for Canaan's land. You may tell them, brother, when you see them, I'm a poor mourning pilgrim, I'm bound for Canaan's land. You may tell them, sister, when you see them, I'm a poor mourning pilgrim, I'm bound for Canaan's land. I weep, and I mourn, and I move slowly on. I'm a poor mourning pilgrim, I'm bound for Canaan's land. I weep, and I mourn, and I move slowly on. I'm a poor mourning pilgrim, I'm bound for Canaan's land.
As best as I can tell, Alan Lomax's first experience with Sacred Harp singing came from the 1928 sessions of another commercially recorded ensemble, identified on their two-issued Columbia 78s only as Alabama Sacred Harp Singers. This group came to wider renown when Harry Smith included two of their tracks on his 1952 Anthology of American Folk Music. In fact, Smith himself was turned on to these records by combing through Alan Lomax's 1940 monograph, List of American Folk Songs on Commercial Records. Here's that group's performance of Present Joys. It was August 1942 when Lomax made his first recordings of shape note singing, in collaboration with the Vanderbilt professor George Pullen Jackson. Jackson's book on shape note traditions in the United States, entitled White Spirituals in the Southern Uplands, is still fascinating and useful reading on the subject, although compromised by its author's racial romantic perspective. Lomax and Jackson's recordings were made at the 37th session of the Alabama State Sacred Harp Convention at the Jefferson County Courthouse in Birmingham, and these were the first ever made of a full battery of singers, as opposed to the smaller ensembles that appeared on commercial records in the 1920s. A year later, 1943, the Library of Congress Recording Lab issued an album of a selection of these recordings, simply under the title Sacred Harp Singing. It's still available in digital formats online. The last song on that album was the ever-popular arrangement of the English Christmas carol While Shepherds Watch Their Flocks. It appears in the Sacred Harp as Sherburne. As we heard a later recording of that piece on last year's Christmas special on Been All Around This World, we'll hear an unreleased song led by the same leader in 1942, one R.N. Hornsby. This is a fuguing tune called Ballstown, text by Isaac Watts, music by Nehemiah Shumway, whose shape note hymnal, The American Harmony, was published in Philadelphia in 1793. Lomax argued that the Sacred Harp was the sole American inheritor of the Western European choral tradition, exemplified by Bach, but processed through the varied folk traditions of Britain, particularly the close harmony singing of Wales and of the south of England, the latter best represented by the wonderful Copper family. This then emerged into the American frontier through the Cumberland Gap. He called it the match of any polyphonic music in the world, as we'll hear him say himself momentarily. And like the group work songs of the Southern Penitentiary System and the ring shouts and hymns of the Georgia Sea Island Singers, capturing the sonic breadth and depth of Sacred Harp was a challenge to Lomax throughout his career. He ultimately tried 3 times, each time bringing to the task the most advanced technology he could muster. We'll jump ahead to 1959 now, when he, no doubt champing at the bit with his state-of-the-art Ampex stereo tape recorder, visited Northeast Alabama, the epicenter of the Sacred Harp tradition, and the 56th annual convention of the United Sacred Harp Musical Association, held at the Corinth Baptist Church in Fyffe, Alabama. Lomax and Shirley Collins made nearly 7 hours of recordings on a single day in September, and we'll hear the last 6 or so minutes of them, one of the more powerful oral documents I know of a shape note singing. First, you'll hear the parting hand, the traditional closing piece of most Sacred Harp gatherings, at the close of which a woman launches into the singing of Hallelujah on page 146, which in turn, come the second verse, morphs into Amazing Grace, or, as it's known in the Sacred Harp, New Britain. Both the parting hand and Hallelujah were composed by the prolific William Singing Billy Walker and appeared in his Southern Harmony hymnal, published in 1835. It was also in the Southern Harmony where the tune and text of Amazing Grace were first combined, no doubt Walker's foremost contribution to American music. There's a lovely passage in George Bullen Jackson's White Spirituals in the Southern Uplands that appears under the subheading, The Effect Upon the Singers. Writing about his experience at a Sacred Harp convention in Mineral Wells, Texas, Jackson reports, quote, "The group as a whole got its catharsis in songs and tears. If we are to believe the psychologists as to the, quote, immorality resulting from the excitation and non-satisfaction of the emotions, then those Sacred Harp singers were engaged in one of the most purely moral pursuits. Their emotional catharsis was 100%. If these people were not happy in the best and fullest meaning of the word, then I have never seen human happiness." 1983 was the last year Lomax labored to document Sacred Harp. At that summer's Smithsonian Folk Festival on the National Mall, he and a video crew in the thick of shooting their American Patchwork television series were able to catch a few songs performed by Southeast Alabama's Wiregrass Sacred Harp singers. For many decades, Sacred Harp singing was widespread in black communities on both sides of the Florida-Alabama line, in Georgia, Mississippi, and in Texas. A precious few instances were released on commercial 78s in the late 20s and early 30s, although primarily of the 7-note variety. And in 1934, a book appeared called The Colored Sacred Harp. Compiled and published by a black composer named Judge Jackson, a native of Montgomery but resident of Ozark, Alabama, in the Wiregrass region, the book was born out of Jackson's frustration at having his compositions rejected by the white publishers of the Sacred Harp. The Colored Sacred Harp contains 77 songs, all but one written by African Americans, and for many years it was used by the Alabama-Florida Union State Convention, a meeting of black shape note singers that has, sad to say, gone extinct, along with the touring group known as the Wiregrass Sacred Harp Singers, who also sang from the book. As the Sacred Harp Publishing Company's Jesse Carlsberg has written in a recent article, the Colored Sacred Harp is now, as of 2017, used only at 2 white majority singings in Montgomery, Alabama, and in these contexts, respectfully lacking the uniquely African-American performance style full of ornamentation and call-and-response singing, which we'll hear in one of the 1983 recordings made by Lomax and his crew of the Wiregrass Singers, led by their longtime director, Dewey President Williams.
We're going to sing how long? 155. You know, I've been here a little while. Lord's been good to me now. Don't y'all look at me and think I'm ready to go or want to go. I'm going to stay with y'all until the closing of this session. I'm going back to Alabama. Watch me go. See y'all the that's it. How long they say now? Oh, how long? She yelled just right out of their leg. Fly swiftly round the wheels of time and bring this promised day. And bring this promised day. Fly swiftly round the wheels of time and bring this promised day. And bring this promised day.
Later in the summer of 1983, Lomax and his video crew visited the Holly Springs Primitive Baptist Church in North Georgia for the biannual singing there. They packed along the most gear that Lomax had ever arranged for a field recording session, 4 cameras and an 8-track tape machine, attesting to his hunger to finally capture shape note singing in its fullest range. Representatives of all the first families of the North Georgia-Alabama Sacred Harp community were in attendance, among them Densons, McGraws, Ivies, Hamricks, and in addition to shooting hours of the singing itself, Lomax also arranged for the filming of the entirety of the singing school which preceded the convention. this led by Sacred Harp Publishing Company director Hugh McGraw. They also taped extensive interviews of attendees during the famous Dinner on the Ground, central to every such gathering. We'll hear a recording from this session of the singing of Help Me to Sing, page 376, led by one of the foremost scholars of Sacred Harp, Dr. Warren Steele of the University of Mississippi, although I'm sorry to report that mixes of the 8 tracks are not yet available in any usable format, and we'll have to content ourselves with these low-resolution mono files. Thanks for your patience. Thanks for listening. It's been all around this world.
Warren Steele, 376. 376. What about Bob Ness? Yeah, they're the same. Love.
To conclude this edition of Been All Around This World, dedicated as it has been to the Sacred Harp, we'll hear a really quite astonishing monologue of Alan Lomax's that sprung out of a cursory interview that he was conducting in the cemetery at Holly Springs that 1983 summer's day with Sacred Harp scholars Buell Cobb and Phil Summerlin. It's Summerlin you'll hear speaking at the beginning of the clip before, and there's no other way to say this, Lomax feels the spirit and launches into an impassioned socio-musicological meditation on Sacred Harp. It is a shame that Alan wasn't able to give Summerlin and Cobb more time in this interview, although Cobb did go on to write the seminal book, The Sacred Harp, A Tradition and Its Music. But what's really remarkable is that the clip ends with Lomax's prediction that Sacred Harp would enjoy a surge of popularity all over the country, and indeed the world. His interlocutors are reasonably skeptical, but it turns out that Lomax was absolutely right. Thank you all for listening to Been All Around This World. My name is Nathan Salzberg. I'm your host. We especially appreciate our return listeners who have kept up with our highly occasional podcasting schedule. On and off travel this season has made a consistent release of the program somewhat difficult for me. Also, we're in a bit of a different recording situation today, attempting to do the narration in a barn, where I spend most of my personal and professional time in the state of Kentucky, thus the natural reverb you're hearing on the microphone. It is not, I assure you, an effect. If you're not a subscriber to the program, we invite you to become one by visiting iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you find your podcasts. You can also look at culturalequity.org/podcast for a list of resources relating to music and books mentioned in this program. Greatly appreciate you listening. We'll see you next time.
speaks to the heart of what is good and true. And as I said a minute ago, I have difficulty knowing how to talk about it, knowing what words to use to describe it. But in a setting like this, with people like these, when we take the parting hand, for example, and I see Uncle Bob Denson, who may or may not be here the next time, and who knows, I may be the one that's gone and not him, it reaches me at a level that seems to speak of that which is lasting and true and good, and I don't know how better to talk about it than that. It deals with me on a level that my financial rewards or my job benefits don't speak to. And even though I'm an educated man, this is one of the more powerful things in my life.
Well, I think there's some very important cultural considerations here. First of all, Northwest Europe, and that includes the Anglo-American tradition, has the most durable and collection of four-square melodies, four, 8, or 6 phrase melodies of any area that we know about in the world. These melodies are so attractive and they're so powerful that many of them go back at least 500 or 600 years, certainly in manuscripts, and probably more, many of them at least 1,000 years. They have been reused for dance songs, work songs, love ballads, hymns, and then the hymns turning into love songs and dance tunes again. That's happened in the Sacred Harp tradition. Many of the Sacred Harp melodies are old-fashioned square dance tunes that once were sung as hymns, and then before that as ballads again. We've heard versions of Barbara Allen today. We've heard one of the most powerful songs is Wondrous Love, and then that goes, what wondrous love is this, oh my soul, was once sung, my name is Captain Kidd, as I sailed, a ballad about one of the great pirates that came out of England. But before that, that tune was sung as a love song, as a witch's song. These clear four-square melodies have been so satisfying to the people of these misty British islands and the nearby Scandinavia and Western France that they've been satisfied to have that and almost nothing else in their repertory. They didn't have a whole lot of musical instruments. They didn't have an enormously complex choral tradition as they did in Germany. But there were these spots where there was singing in harmony. In southern England, in Cornwall, in Wales, and in the western part of Britain, there was singing in harmony. And that tradition, which flowered in the music of Bach, that choral tradition, which is sort of North Central European, has been kept alive in this Sacred Harp stuff, and in nowhere else in the United States. It's very old, this singing. It's very old, this way of singing harmony. And it's exciting that it is multi-melodic, and each of the parts is an old-fashioned, powerful West European song, like Barbara Allen, or like The Braes of Balquhidder, or like Captain Kidd, or like Soldier's Joy. And it's in this passion, the passion for melody that is so important in the British American tradition is alive here. And I suppose the Sacred Harp book is one of the great collections of West European melody that includes things that came out of the Reformation and in the 300 or 400 years since that. And then it's set to the poetry of the great religious poets, Isaac Watts and John Wesley, and then Daniel Reed, and then many others who came along after them, and who we have to remember that these Reformation people were not just casual religious rebels. They were political as hell. They were fighters for freedom. And they were fighters for the kind of democracy that's represented in the Sacred Harp meeting, where everybody has a vote, where everybody gets to sing, where everybody gets included, where nobody can outdo anybody else. And the West European fellowship community is so superbly represented in this. The other big thing, of course, is the relation of the single individual to all eternity. You know, I think the most extraordinary thing that happened to our ancestors when we landed here was the fact that the authority of the established church was broken. And that was almost more important than the political revolution. Every man every jug was on his own bottom, spiritually as well as politically and economically. Every man had his own personal relationship to God, to heaven, to morality, to the community. He was responsible for himself. And Americans took this burden first. This was what made their faces so flinty. This is why they had to have such a strong and rigid morality. That's what made it possible for them to go as individuals and in small groups across the Appalachians into the unknown and survive as human beings and establish quiet, orderly communities as single families. They could carry the whole culture on their own shoulders. And this was the first group of people who had ever done this in all of history. Before, West Europeans had their pagan festivals, they had their Christmas, they had their Easter, they had all sorts of community festivities, but these people were shorn of all that, and they had just their relationship to their own life purpose and to God. And that iron is so clear in these songs. I think that's part of the reason for the tragic character of these songs, the individual sense of that he's totally responsible for his own destiny, That is, and all the people that I've seen here today are very, very, they have that burden and that privilege, I think that was one of the things that makes the men so damn happy. They're saying, well, we're really, we're really men, And our ancestors were men and could not just face danger, but face God without an intervening religious structure, without an established church to help them. I think that is in this thing too. I don't know. I think that the result of all these factors that we've been talking about, the fact that these people are Welsh origin with a Welsh musical style, and others are really Irish with the Irish blah, the Irish ability to embellish, and others four square singers from Aberdeenshire, and others Cornishmen with the bosky, sweet harmonies of southern England. All these things are blended into the Sacred Harp singing book and singing fraternity. They have put together the whole of Britain. Britain is a culture of many cultures, but all those cultures were welded together in the Appalachians, in the square dance, and in the religious music, particularly in Sacred Harp. It sums them all up. It combines them all, and that takes a long time. It took 150 years, and was a work of tremendous genius by the people who did it. And you feel it all shimmering in this magnificent music that we've heard here. And the result is that we have an American music that matches the best thing of Eastern Europe. It's as wild and splendid and full-bodied and multi-parted and multi-dimensional as the music of the Ukraine or Macedonia, where I suppose, or the music of the Caucasus, where I suppose the greatest of all polyphonic choral music resides. And I think that the sound that we recorded today will simply knock the hats off the Russians when they hear it and seeing the faces. Because these people look like a bunch of North European, North Russian peasants singing their religious songs, and the sound isn't too different, you know. There's that too, which is so incredible, that the whole thing could have balled itself up, and all this, that the Reformation and Scotch-Irish and Cornwall and Lord knows what else has produced for us a music that's the match of any polyphonic music in the world. And that's what Sacred Harp is for American culture. And I think that someday, not too far, we'll have thousands of Americans singing it. Hundreds of thousands.
Do you think so?
Yeah, I do. But look what happened to bluegrass. I mean, after all, the banjo was hanging on the wall 40 years ago. Nobody played the banjo. The banjo now is an everyday American sound, beautifully played. The thing is that it's harder to learn how to sing. It'll take longer with this.
I guess I have that hope, but at the same time I have a certain fear that in being accepted, this could also be taken over somewhat, as bluegrass has been somewhat taken over, though bluegrass has certainly not lost its appeal.
Well, the more of these documents that we have, which just break down barriers. After all, those records converted you to being the damn good singer, as we've heard today, and we hope that these television pictures will make it possible for a lot of people to take the music as seriously as they would if they were learning the music, as seriously as they